Actually, this part and the next part will be quite short, not as extensive as the first part. So the question 4 I was asked to answer was, are there any LEMs working now? Are there any examples? So the short answer is that, to my knowledge, there are no true or real LEMs working right now due to legal barriers. So right now, the regulation doesn't really allow for such flexibility and the trades between different consumers via the suppliers. However, there are a number of successful trials, as well as there are some LEM-like operations in place, and I'll explain what I mean by LEM-like operations. So there are two quite well-known trials. First of the two is the Cornwall Local Energy Market Trial that has that finished already a year or a couple of years ago. It was a project for 3 years. It involved more than 200 residential homes and businesses participating in this trial. So what was being traded was exactly the flexibility. So these homes and businesses, they were equipped with some solar panels, with some batteries, and then they were connected to a platform run by Centrica, and they could offer flexibility to the grid operators. And the selection of the flexibility was done based on an auction mechanism, meaning that for, let's say, for every half an hour, all these houses and businesses, they would send offers. An offer may look like, for this half an hour, I can reduce or increase my demand with 2 kilowatts. And I'm happy to do that for you if you pay me £3, let's say. Yeah, so all these offers will be sent to Centrica, to the marketplace, and then they're aggregated, and then the grid operator could see what's the status of the grid, and if the grid is going out of balance and the grid needs extra supply, it will send a command to Centrica saying, I need 1 megawatts of supply, extra supply. And then the marketplace of the Centrica will actually look at all the offers received from the houses or businesses, and will choose the ones that are the cheapest and will activate them. And then for that service, Centrica will get paid by the grid operators, and the Centrica will later on pass some of these rewards to the owners, to the houses or businesses participating. So at the end of this trial, on average, there were savings per homes. That's about £350. And also, or maybe more importantly, there were 10,000 tons of CO2 savings per year. So right now, there is another project called LEO. That's the Local Energy Oxfordshire. It's run in the area of Oxford, and there are many partners. And there again, the trial is about trading flexibility, but this time they are trying to give a bit more responsibility for the local grid operator. In the Cornwall local energy market, there was this national grid operator making decisions, and now with the project LEO, the local grid operators are given a bit more power, so the decision making is with them. And so the trial is still ongoing, so the results are not public yet. But my anticipation is that, again, the result will be quite positive. And the last bullet point I have in this slide is Urban Chain. So Urban Chain is a company, real company operating. It's a Manchester-based startup. It was actually established by an ex-University of Manchester graduate. So they provide a marketplace for trading renewable energy. And what they do is they connect, via their marketplace, they connect local generators with large consumers. So I want to emphasize here the large consumers, because if you're a very large consumer, then the regulation allows you not only buy energy from the suppliers, but you could also buy energy from directly from the generators. So this is what the urban chain uses. So they have a marketplace which connects renewable energy producers with large consumers, because the regulation allows them to do that. They could also do the same. They can also sell energy to the smaller consumers, to residential houses. However, right now, the regulation doesn't allow that. So the way it operates, the marketplace of urban chain, it's like a local energy market. However, there is no locality, and it connects the renewable energy suppliers with large consumers, instead of connecting prosumers with consumers. Okay. So next question I was asked to answer is, what are the potential advantages of a LEM? So advantage number one is increased profits for prosumers. So if a LEM exists, and if a supplier can offer a LEM tariff, which means that a very high proportion of the electricity that is sold on that tariff should come or must come from the local region. So there will be a competition between suppliers to buy locally generated electricity from prosumers. So right now, whatever you produce, if you cannot consume it, it goes back to the grid. You automatically sell it to your supplier for a fixed tariff. That's the feed-in tariff, and it's quite low. I think it's 4 or 5p per kilowatt. But with the local energy market and the local energy market tariffs, there will be demand for this locally generated electricity. So suppliers will be competing with each other. And so in theory, they should offer higher prices than the feed-in tariff to buy your extra energy. So that's advantage number one. Advantage number two is, so there will be additional stream of revenue for consumers and prosumers due to trading flexibility. So right now, prosumers and consumers, they are not allowed to trade flexibility. But with the LEM, this will be possible. So, and trading flexibility brings you extra revenues. The other three bullet points, they're somehow connected to each other. So the first one is increased efficiency of the grid, reduced energy loss at transmission lines, reduced peak demand, and reduced costly infrastructure upgrades. So as LEM aims to balance the grid locally, local supply meets the local demand, there is no need to transfer electricity from far distances. That makes there are less losses on the transmission lines, so the whole system is more efficient. Reduced peak demand. So in the traditional grid, the grid operators have no visibility of what's happening on the consumer side. So they just let consumers demand and consume as much as they want, and they try to adjust the supply. And there are periods where, even only for a few minutes, the demand is so high that we really need to upgrade our infrastructure such that it could accommodate this increased demand, this peak demand. But we only need this peak demand, we only need our infrastructure to support this peak demand for short periods of time, for example, few minutes. So there will be so much infrastructure upgrades, costly infrastructure upgrades, just to meet these few minutes of peak demand. However, with the smart grid and local energy market, we can avoid that. So instead of letting the demand go and up and up and up and trying to keep up with the supply, we could do it the other way around. We could try to, instead of increasing the supply, we could reward the consumers who reduce their demand. So which means that there will be, the peak demand will drop, and there will be no need for some of the very costly infrastructure upgrades. And the last point is encourages, so LEM encourages to get people to get solar panels and or batteries. And this is true because the more flexibility you could offer, the better returns you can get, better revenues you can make. So imagine you have a solar panel, you have a battery, you can offer much more flexibility, and you don't need to sell your electricity right now because you don't have a battery. But if you have a battery, you could store it, and you could wait until the moment where the flexibility price is really high, and then you could say, hey, I can offer you some flexibility, and then you sell your flexibility and make good revenues. And question number 6, what are the potential disadvantages of a LEM? So there are not that many disadvantages, I would say. So the one that I could think of is that, so LEM encourages local balancing, local supply, local demand. In order to meet the local demand, you need to have local generators. So you have more solar panels, you have wind turbines, and these are the generators that you cannot really precisely control them as you wish. So then it becomes a bit harder to balance the grid, because now the consumption, the demand side also becomes a bit unpredictable, because apart from the consumption, you also have a local generation and so forth. So it becomes more difficult to balance the grid. However, if a LEM is really functioning and people participating in the local energy market are quite proactive and they are willing to trade their flexibility, then this disadvantage could well disappear, because then you give much more options for the grid operators to use in order to balance the grid. And I think that was my last slide for this part.
Brilliant, thank you. And how easy will those legal barriers be to overcome? Is there a lot of resistance to change, or is it just a case of it not having been done yet?
So because of the environmental issues, now it's becoming much, let's say, easier to convince the government actually to force the regulators to change the rules. Like 10 years ago, there was quite a big resistance from the grid operators, because the way the grid has been operated, it's remained the same for the last 100 years. So they're used to operate the grid as it is, although it's very inefficient. And they were afraid to get involved with the consumers and prosumers, because, as I mentioned, the balancing becomes much more challenging. So there is more work for them. However, now they don't have a choice, so they have to follow the rules, And yeah, so the regulations will change soon because of the pressure put from the governments because of the environmental issues. So we are slowly going towards that direction. Okay, I assume everything is working fine. So this is the last part of my presentation. This is actually very short. So question number 7 I was asked to answer is, what is the difference between the LEM operator and the LEM owner? So let's first see what is a LEM operator and what is a LEM owner. So the LEM operator is the market player who is actually responsible for managing and running the marketplace. So this market player should follow the rules set by the regulators. And so the LEM operator is the market player that runs the marketplace, and they need to follow the market rules set by the regulators. Whereas the LEM owner is the owner of the assets, like the hardware or software needed to run the marketplace. And very often the LEM owner and the LEM operator are the same organization. For example, if I go back to the Cornwall trial, there the marketplace was run by Centrica. So the Centrica was the market operator. And at the same time, I believe they were also the LEM owner, meaning that they got some funding from the Research Council actually to buy the equipment or to build and develop the marketplace in order to run the local market. And actually, this is my last slide. There was a question about the ownership, but not in my expertise, so we decided to not include that question. And this is the summary of my presentation so far from all the 3 parts. So some takeaway messages. Number 1, a local energy market actually unlocks the full potential of smart grids to make our energy system more sustainable. So it's a mean to make our system more sustainable. A LEM will allow and encourage more active participation of citizens and businesses in the energy system. And by actively participating, actually, citizens and businesses could help to run our energy system more efficiently. A LEM could also reduce the costs and increase the revenues of the consumers and prosumers taking part in the LEM. This comes from the fact that they could now provide extra services. They can provide flexible services to the grid. Prosumers could sell their local generated electricity for higher prices compared to the current feed-in tariffs. And consumers, assuming that the LEM tariff will be either the same or slightly less than the current tariffs, consumers could also have lower costs. There are many ways a LEM could work. So here today we covered just 2 cases, and these are in line with what the Greater Manchester Authority thinks how a LEM should or could work. So current trials, they focus on trading flexibility, which at least to me suggests that trading flexibility might become reality first before trading electricity. And the last point is that, as we saw in the second part, the potential advantages of LEM actually outweigh its disadvantages. That's why there is so much push towards adopting local energy markets all over the world, not only in UK. And that brings me to the end of my presentation, so I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. What I think we'll do is move straight into the questions that we've already got, and then if there's any more that you want to add to the board, then we can come and collect those. So we actually sent some of the questions to you, Mustafa, just to give you some time to think, but I will read them out.
So I have these questions, so I can start answering them if you wish.
Oh yeah, okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so the first question is, how are meter readings automated or measured in smart grid systems, and by who? And there is the supplier or consumer. So in the UK, the government has given a license to a company called Data Communication Company. So that company is responsible for automating the readings, basically getting your readings from your smart meters, processing them, and sharing these meter readings with the grid operators and suppliers. So if somebody has a smart meter in the UK, so by default, the data communication company reads the meter reading once a day. So it reads the daily consumption and sends that information to this customer's, this resident's supplier and the local grid operator. The residents have further possibilities. They could opt out from providing their daily measurements, which means that instead of providing daily measurements, they provide only a monthly measurement. So this is really unavoidable because your supplier should bill you, so should generate a bill based on your monthly consumption. There is also another possibility. Users, consumer, could also opt in for half-hourly measurement reading, which means that every half an hour, your smart meter will send information of your consumption for that specific half an hour to the data communication company, which will share it with grid operators and suppliers. So there is, like, the more information you share, it becomes more, it makes the life of grid operators and suppliers easier. So that's why they sometimes encourage people to opt in to send more information. And they do that by offering them some discounts. Yeah.
Thank you, Mustafa.
So,
great.
Yeah. So the second question was, can suppliers help consumers become prosumers? For example, pay for solar panels on a roof and split any profits. In theory, yes, that's possible. Whether suppliers can see potential in that business model and whether they will go for it, it's up to them. But I assume if suppliers become providers of local energy market tariffs and they're obliged to buy certain amount of electricity from local sources, they would want to secure long-term contracts with prosumers so that these prosumers sell their energy to these suppliers. And one way to establish this long-term contract is actually to subsidize their solar panels. So I definitely see a potential, but it's up to the suppliers to decide whether they can go for this business model.
Great, thanks, Mustafa.
Okay, the next question is, yeah, will consumers who generate their own energy be subject to new complex off-gem regulations? That is a very interesting one. So there was a case in the Spanish market where people who owned solar panels and they were feeding energy back to the grid, at some point they changed the regulation such that it was not profitable to anymore to own solar panels because you were taxed so much. You were taxed because you were, in a sense, disturbing the way the grid operates. And that didn't work out well for the Spanish energy system. So I think now they have changed, they moved away from this. So the lessons learned from experience from other countries is that you don't want to regulate too much the prosumers because that complicates things and you scare away the prosumers or consumers for being active in a local energy market. Yes, so you shouldn't treat a consumer or prosumer as a generator, which is well-established market player in the energy market, and they need to follow some obligations. So you should not apply the same regulations to the consumers and prosumers. So my takeaway is that probably there will be some kind of regulation, increased regulations, but it will not be heavy. So the next question, can we as consumers, prosumers set the flexibility rate within an area, example, within Oldham area or Greater Manchester? So flexibility rates, if we follow the market rules, depends on what the current demand and supply in the market is. So if a grid operator suddenly needs a lot of extra supply and there is not such available, they can pay really high prices in order to convince the local producer to generate more energy or the local consumers to reduce their demand. So the prices are really set by the market conditions, but what can consumers do is basically they are setting the prices in their offers. So when they first approach the grid operators, they say, I'm willing to provide X amount of flexibility for this price. And then it's up to the grid operator to decide whether they will choose the services of that specific prosumer or consumer or not. So prosumers and consumers could somehow set their own prices, but eventually it's up to the grid operators whether they accept these prices or not. What are the risks of suppliers still exploiting consumers in the new LEM system? I would say the risks are probably the same as in the current situation, as in the current market. So this is the job of the regulators to make sure that consumers are treated fairly and suppliers are not exploiting the market just to generate more profit for themselves. And it will be exactly the same with or without LEM. Regulators will have this task to make sure that consumers are treated fairly. So I'm not quite sure whether the risk will increase or reduce. Probably it will be the same risk as in the current situation. So the next one, if people are incentivized to buy batteries and PVs through financial benefits, does this just transfer wealth from people without the capital to enter the market to those who cannot enter the market? So this is a very interesting question. So with the local energy markets, if we don't subsidize or don't somehow incentivize people to get solar panels, we may end up in a system where only, let's say, the rich people who already have panels and batteries would benefit the most from the local energy market. Whereas in the current system, there is some kind of all the costs are equally distributed among all the consumers. So this is a very active line of research. So researchers are trying to come up with a LEM design which will avoid this from happening. So we want all the customers to be treated equally and to not have any disbalance between how the benefits of a LEM are distributed. But this is a very interesting and open question. The next question, does the current grid system need an overhaul to transition to a smart grid LEM? I don't think it needs an overhaul. We cannot afford to change. So the current distribution, transmission line, everything will remain the same. What we really need is a reliable communication and then data transfer between consumer prosumers and the established market players. And this could be achieved by everyone having a smart meter in their homes. So most people already have smart meters, so that's already there. And then we need well-functioning market, a local energy market. And this is the job of the regulators to set the rules. But in terms of investments, we need smart meters, which we already have. We need more people with solar panels and batteries, so they become more active. And we need a marketplace. And for marketplace, just to establish one and to run one, the costs are negligible. So could prosumers significantly impact need for industrial generation? What share of energy market can it occupy? That's also very interesting and good question. So the prosumers and consumers will definitely, the prosumers, the local generation will definitely impact the industrial generation, the business model of the big generators. However, I think the impact will be minimum because they are large consumers who really demand a reliable source of electricity. So very large consumers, and the regulation allows them, they directly sign contracts with the generators. So the very large consumers like manufacturers, big manufacturers, they will still continue buying electricity probably from the large generators. So and this is fine because these factories usually have predictable consumption patterns, and you could easily buy exactly that amount of supply from the generators. So you don't really put much stress on the grid because what you consume is more or less exactly what you buy. Whereas with the prosumers, with the local energy markets, what we want to do is to help the grid balance, help the grid operators to balance the grid in the area where the people are living, because there the consumption and consumption vary. So, in my opinion, LEM will not affect that much the business models of the big generators. What happens if prosumers don't adhere with flexibility commitments or requests. There is ongoing discussion again, like how to deal with this issue. The most or the simplest answer is, if you don't provide the flexibility you promised, you just don't get paid for it. That's the simplest answer. But some people question the fact that if you promise to provide flexibility and at the end you don't provide it, someone else has to provide it. So you mislead the grid operator, which might, lead to some extra costs, because the grid operators will have to get this flexibility from somewhere else. And so there is a discussion of what to do with people who don't really deliver their flexibility. So with the established players, such as generators, they are somehow punished. So if they sell a certain amount of flexibility and they don't deliver what they promise they will deliver, they will somehow be punished by the grid operators. There will be fines. However, there is a trend that we should not apply this to the prosumers, because with the prosumers, it's much more uncertain. So sometimes you cannot really control your flexibility. And if you start fining people for not providing what they promised, you may lose them as a whole. So the idea is to try to convince prosumers and consumers to try to commit to flexibility, but if they don't manage to provide completely to what they promised, I should not fine them, not punish them. The punishment, in a sense, if you don't provide, you don't get paid, but you don't get extra penalties for not providing.
So it's what is the direct benefit for local domestic consumers, the average household without generation capability?
Yeah. So the direct benefit, it really depends on the grid tariff, or it depends on the LEM tariff that you are. Hopefully, the LEM tariff will be lower than the other tariffs, meaning that your cost will reduce. Yeah, this is the direct benefit. The indirect benefit, if you are a consumer, you don't have any solar panel, nothing, and if you are on a local energy market tariff, indirectly you are somehow supporting the local community, because by being on this tariff, you are somehow forcing your supplier to buy energy from the local suppliers.
Okay, brilliant. And then one final question just to conclude is, what is your personal opinion of local energy markets?
So I love them. I spent the last 7-8 years investigating different ways. So I think they are the future, and we will move to having these local markets in practice functioning. So if you think about it, right now, if I have a solar panel and if I produce energy that I cannot consume, I just feed it to the grid. And that electricity goes to where the demand is, and the demand is in the house next to me. So if you look at it from a physical perspective, whatever I feed back to the grid, it directly goes to my neighbor, and my neighbor consumes that electricity. But from the financial point of view, I am forced to sell my electricity to my supplier for a feed-in tariff for a really, really low price. And then my supplier can actually sell this electricity to my neighbor for the retail price, so for a much higher price. So for me, this didn't seem very fair when I first started to look at these local energy markets. And for me, it was like, there must be a way where you provide like a marketplace where you connect these consumers and prosumers such that they either completely ignore the suppliers, or they can again still trade through the supplier, but at a much more favorable prices. So it was a natural transition for me. We've seen this transition in the property market with Airbnb. We've seen this transition in the car sharing, for example, with Uber. Yeah, of course, some argue whether this is really the way forward, whether these are really the sustainable way. But I do believe that, yeah, local energy markets are the way forward to have an energy system that is much more sustainable. And to have this sustainable energy system, we actually need the consumer and prosumers to be more active. And what LEM does is just it gives us the means to be more active. So yeah, these are my final words.
Yeah, brilliant. And we just, on that question, we've had a follow-up of, do you have any examples in the world where you see it working really well?
So as I said, there are trials. So in Colombia, they're trying. So it's very interesting because in the developed countries like UK, we already have very well established grid infrastructure. So we have to adapt our vision, the way we see the local energy market works, that it fits with our current infrastructure. But in developing countries, most of the time they don't even have the infrastructure in place. And then really brings up such opportunities. So you could design, so you don't have this restriction of the current infrastructure to design your local energy markets. So in Colombia, there are some trials going on. There is another company in Netherlands, so similar to Urban Chain. They buy from local renewable energy sources and they sell to customers. So they make sure that all the energy they buy and they provide to their customers comes from renewable energy sources. But again, they are not restricted to specific localities, but they're treating the whole country as one, which works really fine, because Netherlands is actually not that large country. So you could replicate these models in different regions in the UK.